to get specific views around digital twins. So as this new phase of the DT Hub is a cross-Catapult initiative, we're very pleased to welcome some facilitators from our sister Catapults today who are running some of the breakout sessions around energy and manufacturing. So I'm going to go through a couple of housekeeping items for the session today. First of all, just to note, this is a hybrid event, so please do bear with us if there are any gremlins as we try to run this both in person and online today. And we'll be recording here in the main room at CPC, and any relevant links will be sent out on the Zoom chat for those of you who are joining on the online version. We're really looking forward to hearing all ideas and suggestions, so please feel free to share at your tables. And if anything doesn't make sense, please do ask. We have various facilitators, both in the online version and here in the room. So please do grab one of us. Okay, so to quickly run through the agenda, we were due to have an introduction from Jacob at Bayes. He has been stuck on the circle line, so he might be running a bit late. If that is the case, then Simon will run through some of Jacob's slides with a bit of a background to the consultation. Next, Catherine will go through the roadblock report that we're going to be using as a basis for today's event. We'll go into an icebreaker, which George will run for us. And then we're going to be using a tool called Mentimeter, which you may have used before. It's similar to Slido to capture some of the barriers that we've identified. We'll then move into our discussions at the separate tables. So we've got 4 tables here in the room and we'll have 4 online breakout groups. And then we'll come back and share the results of those discussions with the rest of the room. Finally, afterwards, we will have some networking and drinks for those who are here at the Catapult and a goodbye to those who are joining us online. So with that, I believe Jacob hasn't arrived yet, so I'm going to pass over to Simon. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Elena. So our colleague from Bayes has been delayed on Circle Line, so he's apparently just walking from the station now. May get here during this. I'll try and ad-lib a little bit and to cover his own slides. So some of you know me. My name is Simon Hart. I'm head of digital twin at Innovate UK, and yeah, very pleased to be here talking to you today, both online and in person. For some of you who may know, I was involved in the original setting up of what became Digital Twin Hub back in, way back in 2016, when we had much more of a infrastructure construction focus. I think some of our IPA colleagues here as well probably remember those days as we got that program set up. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cover over some of Jacob's slides, who, as he apologises that he can't be here in person, but classically the tubes are delayed on the day that we open Crossrail. So there you go, that's London infrastructure for you. Probably why we need digital twins to predict this kind of stuff, especially if it's weather related. So part of the reason for this consultation was to really capture the views of the public, of industry, the views of the policy makers and the policy leaders to help shape what cyber-physical infrastructure can become in the UK. And particularly from the business department's perspective, is what levers they need to pull, what they can do to enable the UK to become a really successful country in developing cyber-physical infrastructure, and especially with a focus on digital twins. Now, some of you, I hope actually most of the people here and online have contributed to the consultation, right? Yeah, a few nods. Good, good, good. Okay, well, the purpose of this meeting here today is, and this roundtable, is to try to capture some of those views. In particular, we want to try to look at some of the more broad understandings, particularly from industry and from the people who are out there doing this in the real world, the people who have actually been running digital twin projects or been in the foundations of what some of the challenges are around those. So as we mentioned, the consultation was run over a number of weeks. It was a formal public consultation. The questions that went into that were actually derived from previous roundtables, from help from industry partners like Digital Catapult, from Connected Places Catapult, and from Digital Twin Hub. And we want to understand this is an exploratory consultation. So we're looking to try to understand what opportunities are out there, and what we can do with digital twins, cyber-physical infrastructure in future. The consultation is available on .gov.uk. It has now closed, but we're able, working with our colleagues at Bayes, able to capture some of the views here today and get that fed into the outputs of the consultation and those impacts that will be derived from it. So cyber-physical systems, and this is where we broaden the horizon a little bit, because cyber-physical systems include digital twins, robotics, autonomous systems. These are the physical digital interconnections that are going to have a real significant impact on society in future. And it's an area that is growing in the UK, but it's also an area that we need to understand very rapidly in order to be able to capitalize on it. Digital twins, in particular, the UK is expected to get a market share worth about $2.6 billion by 2026. We have to be able to enable ourselves to be able to maintain our lead that we have within digital twins in particular. I'm not going to go through all of this slide. Some of you may have seen it before, but this is a kind of broad perspective of where cyber-physical infrastructure and the applications that we have within it. For example, around advanced transport systems, around connected places, around a connected public sector. So how does government draw on great understandings of data, of information, so it can implement policies, so it can implement the best ability to give us the best public services. Down the bottom there, we have energy systems of the future. This is a really particularly important area of growth for cyber-physical and digital twins. Of course, one of the challenges around the energy sector is it's gone from there being 20 big suppliers to, in 5 or 10 years' time, there is going to be millions of micro suppliers. That's the public themselves who will start to put renewable energy systems on their properties, on their homes. But then they also become storage organizations, because they can then feed excess energy into electric vehicles, into the home batteries, and then feed it back to the grid. So how on earth do you manage a grid when you've got those kind of conditions within it, and the rapid changes that's going to drive? How do we forecast that? And around advanced transport and supply chains, we're moving to much more autonomous transport and much more decarbonized transport. So how's that going to integrate together? And probably today, maybe a good example, the Circle Line has failed. It's quite likely it's due to the weather affecting signaling. Well, actually, we probably could have forecast that. We knew the rain was coming. We knew the impacts of what's previously happened. So where was the data? How do we drive that intelligence from it? The key areas of the consultation, I've got on screen here. Some of you, so a little bit of feedback there. Some of you may have gone through these, and we're going to cover some of these in our discussions here today. But there's a few really key ones on here that I think have been overlooked or have not been considered in the level of detail that potentially we may need to do, and that's around people and culture. A lot of the earlier digital twin projects that we've seen have actually struggled when they've hit this, because we approach this from a technical perspective. So we're all a lot of engineers, technicians around the room. We approach technical problems in a technical way, and then fail to think about the use cases, fail to think about how people interact with them. And actually, some of the challenges that have been seen have been around how you bring the people with you, how you bring the organizations with you. And that can particularly come around aspects as privacy, data sharing, and data management agreements. And down here, of course, working globally. One of the things that the UK is already a good exporter of digital technologies. How do we maintain the lead in that market? How do we ensure that some of the early steps that we made, particularly if you look around things like the BIM program and some of the fantastic work that did around the world, how do we maintain a lead within that? And then how do we ensure it's a sustainable market? How do we ensure we can keep this going whilst meeting our carbon reduction objectives? So that was Jacob's part of the slide deck. I didn't have a huge amount to add, really, other than that. I mean, it's just to say thank you to everybody for coming here. We would really like to encourage everybody who is attending either online or in person. Please, can you join up to the Digital Twin Hub? Digital Twin Hub it's a fantastic online resource. It has captured all of the content that was undertaken by Centre for Digital Built Britain since 2016. So there's some really good examples on there. There's some really good roadmaps, the early frameworks around information management. It's all there, and it's a great collaborative resource as well. It's a really fantastic place to go and learn about digital twins and cyber-physical infrastructure. So get yourself signed up on there. Now, we're also, as Innovate, we're also going to be using that increasingly as a resource to reach out to you. So the next time we want to hear about how we're going to design a funding competition, we want to be able to reach out to you in that exact place. He's just arrived. So reach out to it in that exact place. So please sign up to there. Also, just to extend thanks out to the Connected Places Catapult team and the Digital Twin Hub team who are here today, just to extend their thanks for putting the event on and for hosting us. Jacob, do you want to come? I've covered most of your slides. If you want to come and say a few words. Jacob Coco from Bays has just had quite a hell of a journey, I believe.
Thanks, Simon. Yes, thank you very much for having me. And sorry for the slight delay. I had the joy of travelling in person, a cancelled Circle Line and a big muddy puddle, so apologies for the presentation. Thanks, Simon, for covering the material. I suppose the key things from us are, one, a big thanks for all of you coming along in person, all those online as well. It's fantastic to have so many of you here. I know a number of you already engaged in our roundtables that we ran during the consultation period and may have responded as well and fed into some of the representative organisations who have provided really stellar input. So thank you very much in advance for that. I suppose also thanks to Simon, CPC colleagues also for hosting us and organising this all. I think from our perspective, really great, particularly to get thoughts today from you as innovators on what are the barriers you see to I won't duplicate what Simon says, but what we're really interested in is how we can start to give innovators the tools they need to build their solutions, start to test them, prototype, and then start to integrate, because none of our systems exist in a vacuum. All our energy systems, our homes, our logistics, our manufacturing, all exist in systems of systems. So the future is going to be cyber-physical. It's going to be connected across the physical and digital domains, and it's going to be interconnected between the systems. So how can we give innovators the tools to build and test, and then work with other innovators to collaborate and develop systems? So I won't go any longer than that, because I think Simon's probably covered all the juicy technical bits. But please do grab me if you have any questions as well. And thanks again. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. That was a really good preview of the key areas from the consultation. So can we share your slides afterwards? Yeah, so I think some of you would like a record of that. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about digital twin roadblocks research that's already taken place on the DT Hub. From September to December last year, we had a 3-month programme which looked at the digital twin roadblocks, the challenges that are faced by our members on their digital twin journey. We had 59 digital twin specialists across a cross-sector of industries, and we've really facilitated 3 thematic workshops which interspersed with activity on the DT Hub. And in those workshops, we covered the challenge, what is the challenge that we're facing in the first jam. And then in the second jam, we looked at those challenges, those roadblocks, and decided what it was that was causing the problem, and we wanted to prioritize them. And then finally, the final jam involved a sort of a brainstorming and prototyping of solutions, which Jacob just alluded to there. So we've got a sort of an initial collection of ideas, but we want to build on this, we want to develop it, and we want to take it forward across many other sectors. So in those workshops we covered, there were 7 recommendations and 192 ideas altogether across a number of problem spaces. And those problem spaces we identified as need and want, readiness, vision and value, data issues, governance and guidance. And those particular problem spaces we're using as the basis for today. So if you could use those or refer those to those in your workshop discussion groups, that would be great. And finally, what I wanted to say is please do take a look at the DT roadblocks page if you haven't done so already. Engage on the DT Hub, join the discussion forum. We'll be talking about that a bit later. We've got a special discussion thread where we want you to put your ideas following on from this event. And really sort of spread the word as much as you can about the Digital Twin Hub and the opportunities provided through Innovate UK and the CPI consultation. Thank you very much.
All right. So I'm just going to quickly now go through the format of today, what we're going to be doing in the group exercises and how we're going to sort of facilitate our discussion. So we've gone through the intro. And now we're going to be doing a quick icebreaker where we'll get to sort of introduce each other to each other. So we'd like you to find someone that you maybe haven't spoken to before and just introduce yourself, what industry you're from, what's your background, and then a little bit about the sort of the challenges and barriers that you've seen within your industry in regards to digital twins. Once we've done that, we'll come back we'll have a bit of time just to sort of reflect on those barriers, maybe reflecting on what other people have said, and we'll have some quiet time just to sort of jot down on a piece of paper. You got some notes here, or if you're online, just using a note doc, or actually using Mentimeter. Sorry, so we're going to be using Mentimeter to jot our notes down. So for those in person, we'll be providing a link. So feel free to use your mobile phones. And for those online, feel free to jump to the Mentimeter website. We'll provide a link when it gets to that time. And then we'll be breaking out into our specific topic area discussions, where we'll have various facilitators online and in person who will introduce themselves and start to go through some of the barriers that Catherine just mentioned there. We've also got some cards on the table as well for those in person, and we've shared the roadblocks report for those online. And then after the groups, we'll come back together and we'll have a quick capture of like what each group has been saying, and we'll capture some more of your thoughts through the Mentimeter device as well. So I'll skip over this slide actually. So you should all be sat in a group related to one of the three topic industry areas, so energy, manufacturing, multimodal transport, and aviation. And for those online, we'll be creating breakout room groups. So once the time comes, you'll have a breakout room group that you'll be able to jump into, which will be one of the four. And we've got the prompts there. As I mentioned, we've got the cards on the table. So if you flip them over, they'll give a bit more description as well in regards to those specific topic areas. Yeah, I think that brings us on to our first exercise, which is find someone, if you're in the room, find someone you've never spoken to before and introduce yourself. Talk a bit about the barriers that you found within your industry. We'll have 5 minutes to do this. If you're online, we'll be throwing you into a breakout room with another person. So be warned, you're going to be suddenly speaking to another person. So I think that is all set up. So those, the people doing the magic in terms of the breakout rooms should be doing that now. And you will have a chance to discuss the barriers very shortly. For the moment, though, we'd just like you to sort of have a little bit of quiet time by yourself, making some notes. If you're in person, feel free to use your mobile phone and go to the following website, menti.com, and enter the code. And the same for the folk online. If you want to go to the following website, enter the code, and you can start typing in some of the barriers that you found within your industry. You use this as a sort of a way just to sort of document your thoughts. We'll have 5 minutes of this. Again, feel free to use the cards as a way of inspiration, and also the conversations that you've just had just a while ago. So I'll give you another 5 minutes, and then we'll be going into the groups where we'll be discussing what you've started to write down. All right. And now we'll just get to hear back from each of the groups and just trying to understand some of the conversations that you've had already. If aviation, if you want to join us back in here as well. So I'm going to call on each of the facilitators here. So we're going to go by the different sectors. So we're going to start with Yelena. I'm going to come over with a mic, and then I'll pass to Emily on the online group. So Yelena, I'm going to come with the mic so the online group can hear you as well. So if you just want to provide a quick summary of what your group was discussing, and then if you want to pass to any of the table to help back you up as well. All right.
Thanks, George. Okay, a couple of the things that we discussed in our group on the energy sector actually turned out to be not necessarily energy specific, but a lot of the general findings that I think probably might be similar to some of the other tables and the ones that you've been discussing. An interesting thing around this is how can we actually use these kind of discussions to learn across sectors. We didn't come up with kind of specific things that related to this one, but definitely on the definition of what is a digital twin. Lots of confusion found in this area, so different people having different understandings of what it can mean in different contexts, and also not necessarily understanding how to engage. So although this is a term that many people have come across and used, there's not necessarily the case for why businesses should invest in this technology, what it can do for them, what the ROI is, and how they can actually use this to generate outcomes that their business really needs. So there are lots of different issues that we discussed, some of them around standards and interoperability and how we allow the communication of information between different sectors, different industries, even different companies within the same industry. How can we overcome that, especially talking about kind of proprietary solutions that might have their own data formats and ways of approaching this. So I think organization size was something that we discussed. So are the larger organizations having more influence in how standards are developing? We also had a discussion around security. So particularly in the infrastructure area with energy specifically, security is a really important consideration, but how do we ensure that we find that appropriate balance between making sure that data is secure and systems are secure, but also using digital twins as a means of getting useful decision-making capacity. So looking at how we can try and find that balance. And then also just talking about the fact that we are really wanting to find solutions. So technology is one way of getting there, and digital twins can provide that, but the need to be focused on the outcomes and what we can actually get from utilizing this kind of technology. Anybody else want to add some points from the energy group? Jacob? Okay, great. Thanks, George. Let's pass over to Emily.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great, perfect. Yeah, we had a lot of the same points, which is now making me wish I'd gone first, to be honest. But I guess like it keeps it a consistent conversation, but also slightly frustrating that everyone's experiencing the same kind of problems as well. And like Yelena said, not just energy specific, but we focus quite a lot on data sharing as a whole, and how do we ensure there is the kind of appropriate and the most useful incentivization to get organizations to begin to share information, talk to each other, and not just share data, but share insights as well, because it's obviously really crucial that we're not all kind of developing lots of different proof of concept demonstrators, but ensuring that what we are developing is going to be useful over the long term and provides longevity and usefulness as well to organizations of all different types. Because I guess part of the problem is that we're beginning to look at these for a long period of time. It's not just kind of going to be siloed by sector, but we'll have to obviously bring in a lot of different people to the conversation. It's just ensuring there's the correct incentives in place to enable that. We also spoke a lot about organizations as well, and how we need to ensure that the kind of culture shift is universal throughout organizations and not just kind of sitting within one kind of digital team, for example, so that everybody is kind of on board with the change that's needed to ensure their longevity throughout. I also spoke about kind of the need to have or to incorporate more robust standards. So I think a lot of the conversation is around how we need data to be updated and regular and in a granular enough format But in reality, getting that in that way is not going to be an overnight task. And there's lots of places where companies have lots of legacy data where it just isn't going to be in a format suitable to bring into these digital twin solutions. So ensuring that kind of the translation of this is incorporated into solutions, and just making sure that we can appreciate that there is lots of barriers and challenges that go alongside data sharing, and that there's considerations in place to ensure that we're kind of focusing on that data shift that's needed, but also the skills shift and the resource and time and money shift that's needed as well within different organizations. And that was kind of what we discussed in our breakout room.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily. I'm going to pass on now to Daniel. I would also recommend if you want to sort of contribute more to the Mentimeter, if you feel like some of the points that you were making within your group discussion haven't been captured yet, feel free to go back onto Mentimeter and put down the code is back up there. You need, for in-person, you'll need good eyesight, but the code is there and the website is there. But I'll pass back to Daniel if you want to discuss what your group was talking about, and also feel free to pick on people as well within your group.
Hi, we were talking about multimodal transport. Focus was on the governance and guidance and vision and values, but it was a lot of it spread across the different areas as the previous discussions. Most of the sort of focus was around the use cases and what you're actually doing it for, and then the data structures need to be putting in place to reflect those use cases. There was some discussion around the challenge of some academic definitions actually putting people off and mis-selling people and making it more difficult to make these things a reality. So it's very much about having the use cases and the understanding of what the tool's going to be used for. We did also talked about what the real definition of a digital twin is, and the key message was it's about the data rather than the tools being something that sits on top of the data. And then we were talking quite a lot about how data is going to change over time, and the detail in the data and how that's going to change what the meaning is and how you're going to take it out, and how you actually reflect that quality back into the standards and the data that's there. And then we talked a while about public good, particularly linked to governance and what data you're storing and shouldn't store, and who should be the owner, and whether you actually should make everything open or whether you should keep some things closed. Anything particularly missed or?
I think it's important to recognize what is the limitation of digital twins, because it cannot be really everything. So it's important to recognize the limitation so we can really know how we can overcome that, because it can never replace the empathy of people.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
Perfect. Thank you. And I think, Clemence, if you want to talk about the multimodal transport for the online group, if you, again, feel free to pick on any of your group to back up some of the points that you what you'd like to share.
Yeah, sure. So I think that Tom Deacon will start sharing a bit of summarizing the thoughts and discussions that we had, and I add any details on that. So Tom, up to you.
Yeah, thanks, Clemence. We had a really lively discussion, a really very interesting group of people in the transport breakout. I picked up, I think, 5 themes that came out, some of them similar to what we've heard already. One about sort of common understanding of what is a digital twin and what is it for. Everybody has a different idea of what it is, so it's clear to get that common understanding and common language. We also covered the fact that it's actually it can be, if you're not careful, quite a complex concept to get across to decision makers and investors, and therefore it's particularly important to focus on articulating in terms of outcomes that the digital twin will enable, rather than the complexities of its design and so on, which was alluded to earlier on as well. There was a comment about the need for a holistic view, and I would add the fact that that holistic view focused on the route to value. So, for example, in transport, it might be fine to measure journeys, but you need to factor in the payments as well. I think that was Ken who mentioned that, in order to get the bigger picture and understand the impact on revenues and potential revenue increases and so on. Very strong point made by, I think that was it Andy or Jez? I can't remember now, or Eric maybe, on security. Very interesting case study from let's say a London-based infrastructure project where it was a collaborative contract, and therefore there was lots of great sharing of data, which meant that the construction was able to progress, positively. But the fact that some of that data was shared on the open internet and being critical national infrastructure, it wasn't a particularly good thing. So therefore the importance of information security was the fourth theme. And finally, very interesting point about the conflict, if you like, between fidelity and frequency of update. So you want to measure when things change and update your digital twin on a regular basis, but that costs money, it takes effort. And the more fidelity you have, then the more expensive it is. So therefore you need to make sure that the fidelity is appropriate for the phase of the asset life cycle that you're in. Anything else that I've missed from the group?
I think you covered most of it. And indeed, yeah, we mentioned this very siloed approach, and really instead of maybe more on the understanding and the purpose of the digital twin, really focusing on the problems it solves rather than trying always to explain the concept of it, depending also on the audience. But anybody else in the group like to add something else?
Hi, Claire here from Diagonal. I would just add that thinking about the definition of what gets incorporated into our models, whether it's transport, city planning, what have you, is quite important. And how we're talking about the solutions, how we bring the solution benefit to digital twin up front in the project to have greater opportunity for input around what should be measured, what should be included in the co-creation and design of digital twins. I think that's quite important across any of the topics that we're talking about. Thanks.
Thanks, Claire. So I think that's all on our side.
Perfect. I'm now going to pass over to the two Jonathans. So the first in-person Jonathan, and then we'll go to online Jonathan.
You could also say it's my twin. So afternoon, everyone. From manufacturing then, we were looking at need and want and data issues. We ended up sticking on need and want, to be honest. So we started with a discussion around the value, which is always a good place to start. And then also looking at how you start to sort of evaluate that across the life cycle. So if you're inputting data right at the start, but it's only being used for maintenance, then how do you sort of justify that to other people in there? And then we ended up starting going down as discussion around agile versus waterfall. So how do you have the agility to sort of make changes and reflect on those, but also then start to pull in the discipline from waterfall? So if you need security in there and you're dealing with a lot more sort of micro companies to have analysis tools or whatever else pulling into this, then actually you need a bit more discipline than just sort of failing fast and failing often. There are approaches for sort of secure by agile, but they aren't really common stream with a lot of approaches really. So it's how you sort of match that blend, i.e. you don't want to build a bridge agile was our example, because you don't want it to keep falling down while you keep building it back up. But again, it's how you approach that from that angle. And again, sort of to that example is like this modularity that you're going to have of lots of different things coming together, is how you do that securely. So how can you sort of assess the security of data models or things like that of how you go through and do that. Moving on then, so we were starting to look around sort of what is the right tool for the right job and how you can explore that. So what is the metrics that other companies have looked at, and how you go through and evaluate, well, if I'm using this technology, is something else coming forward? How do I move away? What standards are there for that interface of how we look through and doing different things? We also came then across sort of moving into standards, and even for manufacturing, the UK standards are different to French standards, different to German standards for aerospace. So a civil aircraft has to be regulated for the different regions that they're flying over. So you can't even just have one standard. So again, interoperability doesn't mean one standard. It means that your standards can be mapped across equally between each other really easily. And then onto interoperability, looking at more of, well, it's not just interoperable data models and sort of being semantically able to move between them. It's the architecture, it's the models, it's the standards. And actually something that came out of discussions was actually if you're starting with this, then potentially looking at more like SAP and the highly operational data might be a good place to start, because there's lots of that being sent around. If you had a twin of who was available on the shop floor, you could actually make better decisions on what to actually machine that day. And it might be sort of a good area to start, which then led us into a lot of the funding is focused on sort of demonstrations of value, whereas actually most of all of the funding projects are looking at sort of, they've still got a lot of time up front looking at was what we described as archaeology of cleaning the mud away. And everyone's doing that. So can we not look at funding for sorting all that out as a big problem? So there are open data models that people can just use, and then nobody uses those moving forward, which then also led into the information management framework, not the information management framework, but how we have these in place and how suitable they are for different sectors. So if there are challenges, can we sort of suggest improvements or sort of version control up and see how that maps forward? Which then also led to, even if we could sort out what the sectors were doing in this space, they're not can't necessarily share their work. So what are the levels of maturity of what can you say? So is there a green tick of an organization supporting a global information management framework, or is it that you use these data models but you can't say how you're using them, or what's that maturity of sort of adoption? A lot of these things that could be sort of and are published on the DT Hub. Which then led us into supply chains and how all this data is sent around. That's as short as I can be. Any comments from anyone? Over to the other Jonathan.
Thanks, Jonathan. We've nominated Robin just to summarize, and then I'll jump in the end if there's anything.
I didn't jump back quick enough. Okay, so it's manufacturing that we were discussing. We tended to talk at a sort of higher level about explaining the need. Explaining the need for companies to get on board with new techniques and thinking about data. I mean, often when we talk to engineering companies, for example, and this is what we discussed in the group, is that it's they're just concerned with keeping their business alive, right? So what is their motivation for better use of data, other than that they leave the data on the individual machine and they might look at it for some sort of diagnostic purpose later on, rather than thinking about building digital twins from these things, and then how can you have virtual models then to allow them to do different sort of what if scenarios is further down the track from that, but also understanding value in different parts of the sector and those individual supply chains of the primes within that sector is something else that we discussed. Do they understand the value? Do they have the knowledge in decision making capability, but also in their staff on the coal face, so to speak? Do they have that knowledge there? Do they have the right skills to understand how this might be put in place? You need all this sorted before you actually really embark on a digital twin project. There needs to be that level of trust. Otherwise, you will run into issues in terms of legality, because you've got to you really do need to have some leeway around that to get these things in place and have well briefed legal teams. We talked about standardization. So in automotive, there's an ISO standard, and that's great because things need to be right first time for anybody in that supply chain. But that standard is 30,000 pages of standardization. So this is something that David told us about, and is that then conducive to new entrants within that supply chain and innovation? And then we discussed a little bit about disruption and other new entrants into the sector, and is that something that could be a motivator and display some value that motivates people down the digital twin route, or at least having a full control over their data. so we talked about skills. We talked about trade associations, and actually they're critical in it. They can be critical in working right across the sector, rather than being driven by the individual prime. They act on behalf of the whole section, a trusted third party. That's another route to addressing the socio-technical issues here. You know, we did discuss how supply chain management is nailed down in some respects, but is it nailed down enough so that you can, so they might have data, but is it visualized in the right way? Is it readily available to make management decisions? Can that be modeled, and you trying different scenarios within that? Examples that you have are, you know, there's geopolitical issues at the moment. You know, there's for example, in automotive, there's a lot of the wiring looms are produced in Ukraine, so VW and BMW cars are now stretched out to next year in terms of availability, and how does that affect the industry? And could that be planned around? And can you have some single points of failure? How can you avoid those within a supply chain? So we discussed that, but also thinking about data security there, and auditing, and whether there was trust within that kind of within those scenarios, and what can be done to build that up. We did touch on healthcare actually, because we had a surgeon in the group, so Naeem was in the group, and actually the complexity here in healthcare, well, the complexity in manufacturing and in healthcare, there were striking resemblances, and actually the similar issues appear in supply chain, but also in terms of making decisions in terms of policy and things like that. And I think that was kind of interesting to note as well. That's probably everything that we had.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you. And I'm going to pass now to Andrew, who's going to summarise the aviation group.
Thank you. So I got my back to everyone. So we were talking around aviation, and so we left the room because we got very excited, because it's a very exciting topic. So we were looking at governance and guidance and vision and value, and like everyone else, we just went completely off the topic and came back again. So there's a mixture of thoughts here, so apologies if they're not in any particular order, but we felt that what was quite important with a lot of this was where the priorities were. So because it's such a large potential model for aviation, it's what those priorities are, particularly if we suggested a design policy which puts the human at the center of all of this. So looking at the boundaries where we should be starting to develop, if we developed a digital twin for aviation, but it's looking at digital twins as a specific approach, or looking at for prediction, for simulation, for visualization, and other things as well. The data piece obviously keeps coming up about ownership, the availability of that, whether we can trust that, the security aspects of it. But again, everything came back to customer touch points, who owns the data, how that can be used, how that can be monetized, why companies or individuals would want to invest in the use of digital twins and why they would use them. Regulation, we spoke about that because obviously aviation is probably one of the most regulated industries next to nuclear. So how that's linked to safety, so how any form of digital twin would have to have that built into that, how we connect to the value chain. We were looking at customer journeys, communication and education around the use of digital twins and how they can be used for connecting up, not just within the sector, but also with the multimodal piece as well. Again, ownership, looking at, I've mentioned some of the privacy aspects of this, so some of the negative implications of having digital twins, so privacy is one of them. But obviously there's a possibility to introduce more efficiencies into operations, and how you can introduce new tech into those sectors and how they can be utilized and taken advantage of. I think that was most things. There's anything else?
You're really good. Covered everything.
Thank you. And the benefits as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. And I'm going to pass on to Phelim, if you want to quickly wrap up your group online.
Yep, thank you, George. So the first thing we talked about was the need and want, and interestingly enough, lack of understanding of what digital twin meant was not a blocker, which is interesting compared to other groups on that as a blocker. I suppose it's to do with the stakeholders you're working with. Another discussion point was about kind of what's slowing down the industry and maybe trying to reinvent the wheel too much. So organizations and industries are working in silos, and maybe they're working on the same problems, and those problems could potentially be already solved by other industries, especially maybe look towards more like towards the gaming industry. So to get the right people, the right experts around the table so things can move quicker. And then we talked about data issues, so interoperability came up a lot. Latency was actually a good discussion point, and how latency meant different things for different industries. So for example, the aviation industry, latency is a big thing in terms of real-time data. It has to get better, and maybe to have a definition of what real-time data means for the different industries. Another thing we talked about was the completeness of the data. So one data set could have multiple uses, and different stakeholders will have different needs of that data set. So we need more definitions around what a complete data set might be, and the uses you could have from that data set. And then I think Andy from the group was going to talk about a few points also.
Yeah, there's not really much to add. I think everyone said everything that we're almost talking about. I guess real-time data was, our main flag. The current twin stuff is using data sets which are out there, but to do real digital twin, you need real time, but people's definition of time isn't the same. So I'm an urban planner from a city point of view. Our definition of digital twin time is 2 to 3 seconds. From an aviation point of view, it's probably got a little bit tighter than that. And where we get these real-time feeds and where they're shared. And from a gaming point of view, there's a lot of gaming companies out there which are doing this. It's interesting that gaming isn't talked about much here. Xbox Live, the metaverse, etc.
Perfect. Thank you, Phelim and Andy. So now just going to quickly wrap up and just say a quick thank you to all the facilitators online and in person. So thank you for keeping the discussions going. And I'm going to now pass over to Simon, who's going to do a quick wrap up of the roundtable.
I wasn't expecting that. Thank you. Just to extend thanks to everybody for coming along today and contributing your views. I've actually learned quite a lot, even just the table I've been with, looking at some of the things coming through on Menti and some of the discussions. So that's actually been really, really helpful. There's quite a lot of things I think that we need to keep talking about and we need to keep discussing and raising. I know that the outputs of this are going to be collated and will go towards the outcomes of the consultation, and I think we're really looking forward to seeing where that goes. Keeping discussion going, absolutely. Please go to Digital Twin Hub, register if you're not already on there, because like I think I said at the beginning of this, we want to use that as a means to be able to reach out to all the companies, all the people, all the organizations who are going to be involved in this both now and in future. So it's really, really important to see you there. Just to extend thanks once again out to our organisers, for our host here today, the Connected Places Catapult, and to all of the facilitators online. I know there's been quite a few others from other catapults, from KTN, and from other organisations. So huge thanks to extend out to you as well. If you want to reach out to me on Twitter, Simon Bim, use the Digital Twin hashtag as well, because that's a really good way of us tracking the content. And believe me, when we're putting together our own business cases for funding, we do look at things such as the amount of social media traffic that are on around a particular subject. We look at the number of applications coming in. We look at keywords and all the rest of it as a means to tracking some of the baseline of where this is going, both in the UK and abroad as well. So really encourage you to do that. Thanks again for coming, and look forward to speaking to you in the near future. Thank you.
All right, so for those online, I think we'll be wrapping up the session, but for those in person, we've got some drinks and nibbles outside if you'd like to help yourselves. Yeah, and once again, thank you. And also go to the DT Hub forum as well to contribute to any of the sort of add to the discussions that you've been having today to the forum itself. And I think we're going to leave you here with an optical illusion. There you go. All right, thank you.
where I'm going next, so I don't need to.